Hi, I'm Professor Hall, and this is Medical Microbiology, and today we're going to be talking about gram staining. In this particular lab, we want to stress the importance of gram staining and the process of gram staining, and as you read through your lab, you should be able to find a little bit about the history and where gram staining comes from and why it's so important. The other thing is we want to know the steps of gram staining, so you want to make sure that you know all the different steps. Make sure you know the names of the stains and the roles that they play, meaning crystal violet is your primary stain and iodine is the mordant and that kind of thing. So make sure you read through your lab and make sure you get all those different parts and pieces down. So let's take a look. The materials that you're going to be needing, you're obviously going to need bacterial cultures, you're going to need some clean slides, your Bunsen burner, your loop, DI water, all those things to make smears, and then your clothespin, and then finally the gram stain dyes to actually dye your slides. So if we take a look at the procedure, first thing you would be doing is you want to label your slides. You can label them one with a little positive and one with a negative if you want to, and that way you know which one is the positive slide and which one is the gram negative slide. And then you'll want to choose one species for each slide. You're probably going to have about 4. You'll likely have E. coli and Serratia marcescens as your gram negatives, and then Staphylococcus saprophyticus and Bacillus cereus for your gram positives. These bacteria might change a little bit depending on what you have available in the lab, but we're likely going to be using these 4 different bacteria. So you're going to choose one of the gram negatives and one of the gram positives. So either E. coli, Serratia marcescens for the gram negative, Saprophyticus or cereus for the gram positive. So choose one of those 2 for each slide. Then I'm assuming that you've already made your smears. You already know how to make a smear and that those are both prepared. And we then get to the gram staining, the actual staining part. So if you take a look at the gram staining procedure, you see that crystal violet comes first, and we would flood our slide, hold that for a minute, and then rinse with water. We would then have grams iodine. Hold on one second. So here's our crystal violet, just in case you want to see what that looks like. Then you would flood, after rinsing with water, you would flood with your grams iodine. Hold that on your slide for 1 minute. Then after rinsing your grams iodine with water, you would then get to the decolorizing step where you would use the alcohol acetone mix. I always say that you use this drop-wise. We're not going to flood the slide. We're not going to hold it for a minute. This is drop-wise, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Once we finish with the decolorization, you rinse with water, and then the last step comes along, which is the safranin. So you're going to flood the slide with safranin and hold it for 1 minute. Once that minute is up, you then rinse with water, and you would dry with your bibulous paper. So just make sure that you rinse between each step with water, and then we pat dry with our bibulous paper, and then it should be ready to take a look at under the microscope. So let's take a look at how that looks. Okay. So over here at the sink, I've got my slide, and I need to put my clothespin on there. Staining labs get pretty messy, so you want to make sure that if you wanted to bring an apron or something like that, you could do that, and just make sure that you're not getting any of that dye on your clothes. So I'm over at the sink and I've got 1 slide. I would do 1 slide at a time instead of trying to do both at the same time. So my first step is my crystal violet. And so I take my crystal violet, hold my slide over the sink, and I'm going to flood my smear with crystal violet. So I'm going to hold this on here for 1 minute and let the color seep into the cell wall of my bacteria. So let's pretend a minute has passed by. I go ahead and rinse that off with water. Okay, rinse off the excess. Then I'm going to flood my slide with grams iodine. So I go ahead and flood the slide with grams iodine. Make sure I cover the entire smear. Okay. I would then let that sit for a minute and chat with the people next to me while I'm watching the clock. Go ahead and rinse off the excess grams iodine. Okay. Then my next step would be the decolorizer step. This is a step where we see the most mistakes happen. Decolorizer is pretty powerful. We don't want to use too much. We don't want to use too little. So of course that's kind of the trick here. So it takes some experience, but normally what I do is I take my slide and I'll have it at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to drip decolorizer across my smear and as the drip comes off the corner right there, I watch for it to go kind of a light lilac purple. As soon as it hits kind of a lilac purple, because it'll be dark purple at the beginning, once it hits a light purple, kind of lilac color, I rinse quickly with my water. So I don't let the decolorizer sit for too long, and I let it drip pretty quickly. I let it drip pretty quickly as we're doing our staining. The next step is our safranin, and so we're gonna let the safranin sit after we washed off that decolorizer. I'm gonna let the safranin sit for a minute. So I flood the slide. I would let that sit for a minute. That's my counter stain. And once that minute is up, I'm gonna rinse on both sides. And so at the end, I should have my slide stained pretty well. I'm gonna put it in my bibulous paper, again, open to any page. Take your clothespin off, pat your slide dry. If it's not dry, go ahead and flip to another page. Pat it dry. And then you should have a gram stain slide ready to look at under the microscope. So that's gram staining.